So, with that being said, we will start with the review section of moving forward, and we will start off with the framing group. And so I'm going to walk the mobile phone over to Art and Michelle, and going to thank you for your patience again. Speak clearly into the phone, and then we should have some time for questions afterwards as well. Be well so well.
Thanks, Alan. This is Michelle Johnson.
Our name.
So, unfortunately, ours happen to be a highly visual set of slides, so I'm going to probably go through this fairly quickly. What Art and I did was start out by just providing a quick kind of review, because I know that folks are involved in different groups. There very well may be some new folks here. So we're going to talk about the two key sections of our report, our current report that is out now, and just highlight a couple of things that we think are relevant to the larger group. The first one is section 2, and in this section we started talking about what is an SBOM, right? When we started this conversation a year ago, I think folks were on a very different page on what they would call an SBOM and what an SBOM needs to have. What we've done in the current report is define what we call a baseline SBOM. And this is what an SBOM would need to be considered sufficient to be called an SBOM. We have acknowledged in the report that that does not mean that you will be able to do every single possible thing with these SBOMs that's been defined in either the use cases group or our own group, and we've looked at what kind of information would be necessary, but it is what we consider the baseline information. The reason for this baseline information and maybe a more trimmed down SBOM is a big part of that is on implementation, right? Because we'd like to get people using SBOMs as quickly as possible. If we make the information very difficult to gather or very extensive, that's going to delay the dissemination and uptake of this concept. And really what we want is to have as many SBOMs as possible. That's really where you get the value of having these. So I'm going to read off what the baseline elements are. You can see them. I'm just going to read them off real quickly so you have an idea, since we don't have the slides projecting. First one is the author name. That's the author of the SBOM. Who is writing this SBOM? Where does it come from? Supplier name of the components, component name itself, version string, component hash, the cryptographic hash of the component, the unique identifier to help identify those components, and then the relationship. And we're going to get into the relationships in just a moment. There's quite a big discussion in the report around this relationship, and we'll talk about that. But I would suggest reading that section, really, because there's, of all the conversations we've had, that's probably been some of the more enlightening, I think, fruitful in discussing how to make an SBOM useful. The next slide that we have that you'll see really just shows how those baseline components would be written in SPDX or SWID. I think there's still going to be some work going on around SPDX and SWID and potentially some other alternates. But we just made a table that shows you how those particular elements would look. The next slide talks a little bit about those component relationships. So this really benefits from taking a look at the report. When you take a look at the slides, we'll have some screenshots of the figures that we've created. But it's important because there's been some discussion around a flat SBOM, which is just the first set of components in that product, but then there's components of the components, components of the components, and there's relationships with those components. And so we have some discussion around, the baseline relationship is included, but then we also need to know whether when you stop at your point with your SBOM, do you know that's the stopping point, or are there unknown elements beyond it? Is it partial, et cetera, et cetera? I don't know if you want to add into this part. I know this has been a significant discussion overall in our group.
Sure, just real briefly, this section, I'm actually fairly happy with how it turned out. This is one of the areas I think that the answer is not final yet.
Yeah.
We're in this weird place where we're trying to convey, I am a supplier, and I get a component from somebody upstream of me, and I'm trying to make guesses about what is passed, back up the supply chain past them. So it's a weird space to be in and be guessing about. It's a hard concept to capture anyway. So I'm happy with the shot we have so far, but I think there's more work coming on.
Thanks. All right, yeah, and if you have access to the, if you're part of the framing group and have access to our folder, you can actually you can just look at the report. Figure 1 is kind of the basic conceptual diagram showing the Acme application, right, is included in, or the bingo buffer and Bob's browser are included in that, and it just continues. And we had a lot of discussions whether the tree is top down, bottom up, right to left.
That's been settled. It's left to right.
So it is left to right. So if you don't want Art's head to explode, I would suggest that we just work to accept it. But I would suggest that folks take a look at these. We've tried to create these fairly simple examples. I would also highlight that there's a lot of SBOMs I've seen over the years that are in spreadsheets. And when you're looking at a single layer of an SBOM, a spreadsheet might be a very useful form. It could be long. People are used to spreadsheets. They have lots of information in spreadsheets. It's easy to create. What you'll find as you look through your report is if you start going deeper past that single level, spreadsheet creation and maintenance is very, very difficult. So the only thing that I would suggest is to take a look at the tables we've provided as an example of, even in this simple structure, when you start going down layers into the product, it gets complicated really fast. So imagine several hundred components with their additional components within them, and it gets unwieldy very, very quickly. So we tried to show this as an example. This leads into maybe just a mention of one of the phase 2 things that we've highlighted that we think is very important is starting to look at tooling, because this isn't something that we're going to draw in Visio. This isn't something that we're going to be able to maintain in Excel or any name your favorite spreadsheet system. So, as we figured this out, I think a big thing that we're going to be looking for going forward is how do you maintain this kind of information and how do you enable to share it and combine it. And so that's the main parts of section 2 that we wanted to highlight. You can see 2 different examples within that section, and then section 4, it gets expanded further, and we start talking really about the process of managing and working with the SPOM. I'm going to pass it off to Art to talk about that one.
Thanks, Michelle. Just one quick thing to finish off. Right in the framing group's paper, section 2 and 4 are the 2 main parts. Everything else is sort of support of those 2 sections. If you are thinking in sort of table or spreadsheet SBOM terms, I think hopefully there's an easy way to connect the relationship idea with your spreadsheets or your tables. You have a row in your table that's going to relate to a whole other table. So if you imagine you have a whole collection of sheets of paper or spreadsheets or tables, they have to link together in some way. And that way you can think of it in table form and still have the relationship. So moving on, section 4 in our document, the framing group's document is about the process. Again, just summarizing from the document, pause.
Audio switch.
We'll dial in the phone shortly.
So leave this here too?
Yep.
All right, so
Like audio cheat sheet.
Okay. Anyway, summarizing our section 4 is about the processes. So, we define a model of an SBOM, now what you do with that information. So we talked about how and when to create it, how to exchange it. We do not go into great depth. I think one of the highlights for potential next step or phase 2
is we really have to dig into how to exchange. This gets back to the tooling discussion as well. We have a section on sort of the rules for we call them the network rules for our participant. So if I'm a supplier and or a consumer in SBOM, this is mostly on the supplier. What are my responsibilities? The theory goes, if each supplier follows the rules and responsibility for their action, which is the software they produce and the things they include, and those SBOMs, If everyone does this, we have a wonderful network that fits together and we get lots of good information. In theory. So that's what that section says. We have a section, we talked briefly about the different roles and perspectives, and we borrowed this from the practices working group. We borrowed their language and organization, those who produce software, those who choose, and those who operate. So we discussed that briefly. We're mostly pointing to the practices folks for that piece. And then last in section 4, we get into, the terminology has moved around a lot, but use cases or applications of an SBOM. We're pretty confident with our statement that the core baseline SBOM is all about identifying the components, and without that you have nothing else. However, other than a good inventory list, if you want to do something useful with the information, you will need something else. If you want to do vulnerability management, intellectual property, license management, if you want to worry about high assurance, if you want to worry about where your things are coming from for an import or an export control situation, you need more information than the baseline. So we talk about what some of that information looks like, but we do not go into depth because that's as far as we got in our first phase paper. This is figure 3 in the framing group document. This is stitching together some of the charts from the previous figures in the document to show that an operator, someone who's an end consumer of SBOM, can collect many supply chains and in that way gain more information about all the parts, all the software that they're running. So again, sections 2 and 4 are the meat of our document. We're going to touch briefly on what we think some next steps are without getting too far into it, because I think that's its own agenda item.
Later, yeah.
So again, folks don't have the slides. Michelle and I and the framing group created a Google sheet with a fairly long, somewhat note-taking so far list of things to possibly do next. We consulted the work that came out of the September 15th meeting and added some of our own stuff from the framing group. We tried to organize it sort of in terms of why would I do this, how much effort might it take, how important is it, which working group or who would own the item. Needs work and for discussion later today, but that exists. And one of the things we're looking at is getting back to the last part of our section 4. Again, more terminology change. So use case and application, the latest language we're using is capability. If I want to do something with SBOM, what do I need to do that? A serious look at that, not just what we gave it so far as sort of a passing treatment, but what do you really need to do intellectual property management, for instance. We also looked at this so far in a two-dimensional table. So what are the applications or capabilities you want to do with SBOM? And another dimension is sort of the sector. It's not clear what sector differences there would be. We imagine there might be some. I'm not a particular sector expert, so we'll see where that goes, but that's one way to organize it. And then our last slide, which I realize people still can't see, we're trying to illustrate again, you have nothing without core baseline identity information, but you have to add things in order to get applications or capabilities out of your SBOM. And what does that sort of look like? I think I'll just stop there. We're probably at time. Okay. Phone back to Alan. And
we're going to get into it later today, but is it fair to characterize that your group is sort of, there are a number of things that you could do, but there isn't a specific direction that you have in mind at the moment?
Yeah, I think that's fair. Our group has talked about it some. I'm not sure if we are behind the rest of the group, the overall process or not, but we're at sort of what are the possible things we might want to do, and personally at least I'm looking at this meeting as a serious start on refining that down to what are the important things at the top level, what are our goals, and then from there kind of make some decisions about the 54 things we can't possibly all take on at once. So.
Yeah, and I would also just add that one of the things we talked about in our last meeting is the fact that I suspect that there are some of the things that are going to come up today as things that we want to do that would benefit from more than one group taking it on. So I would love to see a big kind of thread today as being in collaboration and how we're going to make, because there's been a lot, I think a lot of the work that we did initially, we were able to kind of segment it into buckets. But I think as we look, a lot of these next steps are going to pull from the various expertise from multiple groups. So I would encourage us to consider that.
Great, thank you.